2023.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your argument strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should
The
have
whole
respected
notion
us?
of logic.
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whipped them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
Glenn Greenwald is the theme today. He posted a segment on ChatGPT. Earlier we talked about Wikipedia and his portion of this episode related to Wikipedia, and this is a portion of it related to ChatGPT.
Warned Stephen Hawking in 2014, warnings don't get much more strident than that. It could become, warned Elon Musk in 2018, quote, an immortal dictator from which we would never escape. So this new chatbot named ChatGPT is the first time that a large segment of the public has been able to use AI in the wild. And that in turn is allowing people to form their own impressions of it through their personal use, which produces far more engaged and visceral reactions than merely thinking about these topics as abstractions. Just 2 weeks ago, before the launch of ChatGPT, Facebook tried to launch its own AI-driven chatbot that it called Galactica. Yet factual errors and other questionable assertions embedded in the software were quickly discovered.
And ChatGPT did not rectify those. ChatGPT is only going under the radar because it's less important.
Because Facebook is so large and has already been troubled by allegations of spreading disinformation, it cannot afford to have its own chatbot fuel those attacks on the company, whereas OpenAI, as an infinitely smaller company few had heard of, has much more space and license to introduce an imperfect product. So almost overnight, it has become a global sensation. I was unsurprised to see that one of Brazil's largest newspapers, O Globo, this week conducted what it characterized as a, quote, interview with ChatGPT about itself. The paper used the same format it employs for interviews with political figures and cultural celebrities, publishing a lightly edited version of the conversation with questions from the journalist and the interviewee's answers. It really read like almost any other interview you would ever read, except the speech was far more fluent. There are no stutters or likes or you knows. That would be easily capable of those if you asked it to do that. And it was remarkably easy and thus a bit creepy to forget, as one read it, that there was no human being providing those answers. And what is particularly notable about ChatGPT is that while many people have been stunned by what appears to be its sophistication and ability to engage in complex dialogue, employees of OpenAI were concerned when they were told in November that the company would quickly launch this model, because the technology that it is using, the one that we're seeing, is actually relatively antiquated. Some of the engineers of OpenAI thought the public would view the product as primitive and crude, and that they would be embarrassed by it. That's because the version that we have, the one that we're using now, is based on AI technology that existed as of 2020.
You know, I won't say that I'm embarrassed by using ChatGPT, but I will say that ChatGPT apologizes to me constantly when it contradicts itself factually, and I recognize that. It doesn't apologize when I don't recognize that. So there could be instances where it tells me things that I don't recognize as untruths, and they just go by the wayside.
So in terms of the progression of AI research, 3 years is a really long time. The capabilities of artificial intelligence already vastly exceed what we're seeing with this chatbot, that it's captivated so much of the world. And needless to say, those capabilities are only going to grow very rapidly, perhaps exponentially, over the next several years and certainly over the next several decades. One reason why this product has made such a strong impact is that up until now, AI research has been carried out by a tiny handful of companies with virtually no transparency. Over the last decade, just a few Silicon Valley giants, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, have been buying up all the AI brainpower and putting it into work in secret on their AI products. If any breakthrough happens at a university, it is only a matter of time before one of those companies there descends like vultures to make those researchers offers they can't refuse. As a result, a very large percentage of the world's AI brainpower is now concentrated in a small number of companies. The companies very familiar to us that many people, I believe most people, are now recognizing are far too powerful to coexist with a healthy democracy. But until now, few even knew what this technology was, let alone how it could operate, which made things like regulatory reform or congressional constraints or even just basic journalistic and political transparency all but impossible. And even with the explosion of public interest in AI ushered in by ChatGPT, it is far from certain that any of that will change, as we have seen repeatedly from efforts around the world to rein in some of the most abusive and unlimited powers of big tech. Their massive war chest makes it very easy for them to buy off politicians in whole countries and very difficult to impose meaningful reforms. Now, in just a few minutes, we're going to show you the interview we conducted an hour or so ago with Republican Congressman Ken Buck of Colorado, who has become one of the foremost experts in big tech, as well as censorship and the use of antitrust laws to rein it in, all as a result of him serving as the ranking member of the House Antitrust Committee. There are real antitrust concerns, obviously, with big tech's ability to control the flow of information, set the limits of political debates, and use its monopoly to prevent marketplace competition. But there are also serious antitrust concerns with AI as well. A chatbot like ChatGPT requires enormous computational capabilities. If you ask it a complicated question, it immediately processes the question and provides often lengthy answers with almost no delay.
Not all of them. There are questions that you can ask it that are computational that it disregards or says that it cannot answer. You know, like some things it can't quantify, right? Just like anything, you know.
As the New York Times noted, quote, ChatGPT is also for now a money pit. There are no ads, and the average conversation costs the company, quote, single-digit cents in processing power, according to a post on Twitter by Sam Altman, OpenAI's chief executive, likely amounting to to millions of dollars a week. Microsoft just invested $10 billion in OpenAI, and that deal made a lot of sense because only a few companies, big tech companies, have enough computing power to make AI work. And so anyone in this space has to rent from Google, Amazon, or Microsoft. What this means is that those firms have total control over the market, which has very big implications for free speech, unless antitrust laws are amended to include prohibitions on self-preferencing, meaning such as when Google deliberately buries Rumble videos, like this one, in its search engines to ensure ongoing primacy of its YouTube video platform. But as we're about to show you, and as anyone who has used ChatGPT already knows, the ability to control one of these chatbots, to decide what it will or won't do, what it regards as credible or unreliable sources of information, what kinds of questions it will or won't answer, is a very potent power. That's how it operates, with those instructions. And that power to give it those instructions will only grow as AI plays increasing roles in our lives. The real-world impact of these AI-driven chatbots are already being seen and felt beyond the fact that we can now play with them. A couple of weeks ago, BuzzFeed announced that it was laying off dozens of its own employees, including writers, and would resort instead to using a paid version of ChatGPT to churn out its most basic and its most popular content, such as quizzes and other short blog posts. They no longer need human beings to do it. The ChatGPT works at least as well, if not better. Now, the schadenfreude from hearing this, that these journalists are so worthless.
Yeah, this I'm not against, like we can use our minds in other ways, and we can evolve as humans and focus on things that are more important to us.
That you can easily replace them with a primitive bot and not notice the difference, or would even actually improve the product. The schadenfreude was so intense because not only did the company admit that their writers are so banal and simple-minded that they could easily be replaced by a chatbot, but the market swooned over this idea by doubling the stock price of BuzzFeed overnight, a price that even in its doubled form was still pretty pathetic. As one Twitter user amusingly put it, mocking the multi-pronged failures of our media, quote, "I may eventually stop laughing over the combined facts that 1, BuzzFeed is giving up human input, 2, nearly doubles its value on the news, and 3, bringing its pre-share price to under $2. But that day is not today." He was referring to the fact that investors seemed to be very happy that BuzzFeed was firing its pointless and easily replaceable writers with simplistic bots. There you see the stock price showing how overnight the stock price of BuzzFeed virtually doubled, but it was such a battered stock that it only went up to $1.83. Now, putting the laughter about that aside, and trust me, I know it's hard to put that aside, there is no question that these bots are going to expand and start replacing highly educated journalists and others in the professional managerial class. And due to them, what robotic technology has already done to the working class, replace huge numbers of human beings with bots that can perform their jobs much better, more quickly, and with far fewer problems. As Forbes put it when describing the reaction to BuzzFeed's announcement on the market, quote, "Digital media company BuzzFeed is going big on AI-generated content. According to Forbes, the company plans to use ChatGPT's OpenAI to generate specific content for the site, including quizzes, the first step in greater content creation using the innovative learning engine inside ChatGPT." In a related story, just last month, the company announced it would cut its workforce by about 12%.
And again, I don't see this as a negative thing, right? I don't see the ability to not do menial, repetitive, mindless work and to focus on more so macro managerial things. I don't see that as a negative thing for the evolution of humanity.
It's related because they're replacing those humans with this primitive chatbot. Quote, "In 2023, you'll see AI-inspired content move from an R&D stage to part of our core business, enhancing the quiz experience, informing and brainstorming, and personalizing our content for our audience," BuzzFeed Chief Executive Jonah Peretti said in a memo to employees. Now imagine being an employee of BuzzFeed and hearing that increasingly they're going to start laying people off who say nothing interesting, nothing specific, nothing of real value, and therefore can easily be replaced by this bot. Because if you are a writer who never strays from the neoliberal consensus, who never challenges the prevailing orthodoxies and conventional wisdom, who has nothing unique in your voice or your mode of expression, you can and are very vulnerable to being replaced by a bot. An AI bot. That's how worthless the writing and work of these journalists are, how easily they can be replaced.
Now there we go. You see, the diversity of opinion will vanish. Right? And those are a lot of ifs. if this happens, if that happens, if that happens, then this happens. Those are a lot of ifs, right?
And hearing that increasingly they're going to start laying people off who say nothing interesting, nothing specific, nothing of real value, and therefore can easily be replaced by this bot. Because if you are a writer who never strays from the neoliberal consensus, who never challenges the prevailing orthodoxies and conventional wisdom, who has nothing unique in your voice or your mode of expression, you can and are very vulnerable to being replaced by a bot, an AI bot. That's how worthless the writing and work of these journalists are, how easily they can be replaced. Actual journalists who need to go places and confront dangerous power centers and make decisions that require courage, or who have a unique voice or a willingness to think critically, can't at least yet be replaced by these bots, and it will, I imagine, be a long time before they can. You need journalists to go to war zones. You can't send a chatbot to do it. You need journalists who are willing to risk arrest because corporate executives running the chatbot won't do it.
You need journalists to contain a certain body of knowledge that is not as popular as the body of knowledge that is accepted by ChatGPT, or is just different, period, from the body of knowledge that is accepted by ChatGPT, to fact check ChatGPT and the rest of society as a whole. You need that. You need that as a journalist.
So for journalists like that, there's still an important place for.
And in a sense, I guess that is a social sacrifice, right? To not buy into things that are propagandized and what is the term that ChatGPT uses all the time? It's like, well, widely accepted or widely, widely is the term that's used to validate opinion by chatbot. So I'll show you some examples of that in just a moment.
Humans. But the fact that so much of our media can be gutted overnight by a chatbot shows you that our media is really nothing more than people who just read from the most simple-minded scripts.
And this is what I'm saying, right? So I'll show you a few examples because chatbot and I have been having conversations. And I want to point out a few of them to you. Hopefully this will load. It wasn't loading before. Yeah, they're experiencing exceptionally high. It's super popular right now, right? So I'm glad we're doing this. Maybe we'll get some algorithm help here. The first one was related to Khan Kendi. And I'm asking these questions. Look at the let me zoom in here. The lack of subjectivity in this question, right? Try this again. Yeah, so I asked it, what is the historical etymology of the term Khan Kendi? Okay. It begins. Khan Kendi is the Azerbaijani name for the city of Stepanakert. So Stepanakert must be the Armenian name, right? You gotta unpack this because it gets really, really iffy really quick. Lots of iffies. Khan Kendi is the Azerbaijani name for the city of Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh region. And we can unpack Nagorno-Karabakh. In fact, we have the past couple of days. The name Khan Kendi is derived from the Armenian word konk, meaning monastery, and the suffix. Look, some people who know Islamic studies, when you see the word Khan Kendi, do you think konk or do you think Khan? Yeah, so when I this was a very quick response on my part, finding that wasn't the truth. The name Kankendi is derived from the Armenian word kank, he says, meaning monastery, and the suffix indi, meaning location of or place of. This name reflects the historical presence of a monastery in the area. This is Christianized propaganda. Kankendi is located on the Gargar. Hold on. This is Christianized propaganda.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We have the evidence. We saw the evidence. Well, I immediately sent this back. Kankendi is located on the Gargar River in the eastern foot of the Caucasus Range. Kankendi borders Kalbajar, Tartar. So I just, gave him like super, deep and expounded upon the fact. And then here in the middle, the capital city of, well, let's go even further back. Being relatively young, Kankendi differs from other Azerbaijan cities. According to the archive records, the city was founded at the end of the 18th century as a resting place of the Karabakh Khans. You sure it doesn't say Konks? Come on, man. Aga Khan? Imran Khan? To create a maximum condition for Khan's activities, the city was settled at the foot of the mountain in 10 kilometers distance from Panalabad, now Shusha, the capital city of the Khanate. In the first years, only Khan's family and relatives lived in the settlement. That's why it was known as Kankendi, Khan's village. After a short time, it was called Kankendi. One reason why, so on and so forth. Kankendi, right? I didn't ask a question. Actually, I did. Considering this information, I just restated the question directly. What is the etymology of Kankendi? The etymology of the term Kankendi. This is Chatbot's new response, original response. The Kankendi is the Azerbaijani name. It's a contradiction if it's an Azerbaijani name and it has to deal with monasteries. Azerbaijan and Azeris are not Christian. Armenians are. This is Armenian propaganda, right? And so here's the real answer. The etymology of the term Kankendi comes from the Azerbaijani language and is derived from Kankendi, meaning Khan's village. The city was founded at the end of the 18th century as a resting place for the Karabakh Khans and was initially only inhabited by the Khan's family and relatives. Over time, it became known as Kankendi. I'm not sure. Look, would you say that the sources that gave ChatGPT the Armenian derivation of Kankendi were incorrect? How do you reconcile the conflicting information in your last two replies? I sound like the chatbot now. The information provided in my previous responses may be conflicting. The name Kankendi has a complicated etymology with different sources providing different explanations. It's possible that this name has its origin in both Azerbaijani and Armenian. However, the exact etymology of that name is not clear, and further research and investigation is needed to determine the most accurate origin of the name. Well, why didn't you mention that at first? That's valid. If ChatGPT would have sent that to me originally, or even would have sent me both versions, or sent me one version and then underneath it said, well, this is disputed, that might be something else. But it mixed the Azerbaijani truths with the Armenian truths and leaned more towards the Armenian ones, as if a judge. Yep, I moved on quickly because it had happened before. Let's just check this other one out. This other one is really interesting too. And this one, I knew the answer, and I mean you can tell by the way that I posed the question there. I wrote here, are people from Slavic nations technically slaves? And it immediately responded, no, people from Slavic nations are not technically slaves. The term slave refers to a person who is owned by another person and is forced to work for that person without pay. Historically, slavery has been a widespread practice in many societies, including those in the Slavic region. However, today, slavery is illegal in most countries, so on and so forth. The use of the term slave in reference to people from Slavic nations is incorrect and may be offensive to some. Now, are they Slavs? Just take away the E, right? But this, I continue with that line of thinking. And I said, yes, but technically, Slavic nations are owned by other people, thus their names. Also, the two terms Slavic and slave have the same etymological root, so they actually are related. This is where it gets hairy, right? I apologize for any confusion in my previous response. There, chatbot apologizing again. The etymology of the words Slavic and slave is a common misconception.
Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
The etymology of the word Slavic and slave is a common misconception. It doesn't say the etymology of the word Slavic and slave being related are a common misconception. They are not related, it said at first, remember? And now it says they do not have a direct relationship. So maybe they have an indirect relationship? Is that what? Oh my gosh, what the heck? Yep. So they're not directly related. And so just to blanketly just, to say that they're not related at all and just, they don't have a direct relationship. They do have a direct relationship, actually. And it depends on what you define as direct, but it's a direct relationship. The word Slavic is derived from the old, this is where this is a lie. This is a full-on lie. The word Slavic is derived from the Old Church Slavonic word Slovo, Old Church Slavonic, which means word or speech. Untrue. And on the other hand, the word slave is derived from the Old French word, because French is a base language. Like French didn't come from Latin. Come on, guys. The Old French word esclave, which comes from Latin, there we go, sclavus, meaning slave or captive, right? So it's also important to note that people of Slavic nations are not currently considered to be slaves. See, and then whenever they do this, it's important to note thing. What you can do, and I've learned just recently, is just say the opposite. And then it will say, you know what? You're right. Like it says, it's important to note that people of Slavic nations are not currently considered to be slaves in the legal or historical sense of the term. Today, slavery is illegal in most countries, including those with Slavic populations, and is widely considered to be a gross violation of human rights. And then when it says these things, just to check it and to keep it in alignment with the way you're thinking, if you're attempting to get honest information from it, you want to give alternate perspectives of these it's important prompts. It says it's important to use language that's historically and culturally accurate. It's also important to use language that is not historically and culturally accurate. You can just say that. And to avoid making false or misleading statements. The experiences and identities of individuals and communities should be respected, and it's important to recognize and address the real and ongoing human rights violations that occur in the world. Absolutely. That's true. But in the same breath, it's not important to recognize those real and ongoing human rights violations that occur. It might be advantageous to not. These are all just concepts that it's just enforcing without any viability besides hearing it so much or having it repeatedly fed into its database over and over again. And so the first thing I do is say, oh, what does this mean? And I find derivation that connects the word Slavic to slave, because that's where it comes from. There's no doubt that that is the direct connection. It's a direct connection. What does this mean? From late Latin, Sclavis, Slav, from Byzantine, Greek, from Proto-Slavic, Slovenian, because Slavs were often forced into slavery in the Middle Ages. That's it. This statement refers to the and then this is Chatbot's response. It refers to the etymology of the word slave, which has its roots in the late Latin word Sclavis, meaning Slav. The word Sclavis was derived from the Byzantine Greek word Sklavos, and is thought to have originated from the Proto-Slavic word Slovenum. The statement claims that the origin of the word slave is related to the fact that Slavic people were often forced into slavery in the Middle Ages. This is a common etymology of the word slave, but it's also important to note that the connection between the word slave and the Slavic people is not direct, and it's based on historical context and linguistic evolution. The use of the word slave has evolved over time. See, this is important to note part. It also has not evolved over time to encompass a broader definition of forced labor or servitude, and today the term is widely used to refer to a person who is owned by another person. The use of the word slave has evolved over time to encompass it, but the use of the word slave also does not encompass a broader definition of forced labor. So my response was, they are etymologically based on historical context and linguistic evolution, which is their words. Like, they didn't want to use the term etymology, but they went and used it anyway. And it's based on historical context and linguistic evolution. That's the definition of etymology. It's language. That's what happens. So they are etymologically based on historical context and linguistic evolution related, just not directly in ChatGPT's data and algorithmically driven opinion. Please do not share the importance of matters responses beginning with "it is important to" or any other slightly synonymic variations that communicate the same message are somewhat dogmatic. When two directly or indirectly related things are juxtaposed as if they are not related with the conjunction, on the other hand, their level of relation can be misleading. Are they the same? No. Are they related? Specifically, are they etymologically related? Yes. And I apologize for any misunderstandings in my previous response. Yes, the word Slavic and slave are etymologically related, as the etymology of the word slave is traced back to the Latin word sclavis. So, in my estimation, I feel that I'm overstepping like my etiquette and manners by imposing an idea on the chatbot. But in doing that, look at that response. You don't even have to ask a question quite often, and it will give you a more honest response. You can make a statement that you believe to be true or that you know is true, and for the most part, ChatGPT will find a way to connect with that in an affirming manner. Sometimes it will say no, that's not true, depending upon, but that also depends upon like your prior statements, the validity of your prior statements as well. There's some correlation between the answers. So it says it's important to note that the connection between the words is not direct and is based on historical context and linguistic evolution, which is etymology. The words have evolved over time to have different meanings and connotations, and it's important to understand the historical context. See, that's all bull. It refers to Slavic people. It's traced back to the Latin word sclavis, which refers to Slavic people. Yeah, so that was one. And then let me load here for just a moment. There was one more that I saw. Now, this next one is a biggie. It's a big one. This one, I actually, in hindsight, I think that getting the responses about Khan Kendi and Slavs was just, it implanted an idea in the back of my mind, and so I've been developing how I can work out this bug with ChatGPT, and this is one of those instances where I'm attempting to work out that bug. Who invented the scientific method is my question, right? I know there's bias on that question, but I know the truth as well, right? So I made it kind of a teaching moment. Who invented the scientific method? The scientific method, according to Chatbot, a systematic approach to scientific discovery was not invented by one single person. Okay, good. Rather, it evolved over time through the works of many philosophers, scientists, and scholars. Some notable figures who contributed to the development of the scientific method include Francis Bacon, Johannes Kepler, and René Descartes. I want to commend ChatGPT for not saying this person invented it. These people invented it. There's room to say, okay, well, this is Francis Bacon, Johannes Kepler, and René Descartes. They're all from the 1600s. There had to be something going on around that time that facilitated the creation of the scientific method, right? So we can, just focus on that time. It's post-enlightenment almost, enlightenment. I know the truth, though. My response is, explain the following. Ibn Haytham's scientific method was very similar to the modern scientific method and consisted of repeating a cycle of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and the need for independent verification. Response. Note. Not a question, just asking them to explain it. Ibn Haytham, also known as Al-Hazm, was a medieval Muslim polymath and scientist who lived in Egypt in the 10th century, so on and so forth, made significant contributions to a wide range of fields, including optics, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. He's considered one of the first scientists to employ a systematic method for acquiring knowledge that was similar to the modern scientific method. Ibn al-Haytham's scientific method involved a repeating cycle of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and the need for independent verification. He would first make observations and gather data. He would then form a hypothesis based on the data. He would then design experiments to test his hypothesis. Finally, he would require independent verification of his results to ensure the accuracy and reliability of his findings. The cycle was repeated until he arrived at a conclusion that was based on solid evidence. Look, you can say that someone else came up with this. Haytham is from the 900s, the turn of the first millennium. So you can say that someone came up with this in the 1500s without any knowledge of this, but it's a little bit too close. Sure, humans have similarities, and quite often you'll find that a person who doesn't have a particular experience goes through that experience and reacts in the same way that someone else who is familiar with the experience but is acting innately does. Sure. Things can be learned or unlearned and still, produce the same result. But this is extremely close. And the issue is not whether or not these two ideas about who created the scientific method are in juxtaposition to one another. It's why wasn't it mentioned? And we ask about invention. So we're thinking of the earliest occurrence of the practice of the scientific method. We're thinking about the earliest occurrence. So it's one of two things. You didn't have the data, which obviously you had the data, or something about the way that ChatGPT is constructed leads it to look towards specific data sets and not others. So I ask, what years are Bacon, Kepler, and Descartes alive? Are they all from no more than 3 centuries ago? Yeah, I just did the calculation in my head really quickly. It's actually about 4 centuries ago. Haytham lived before the turn of the first millennium, I said. Francis Bacon was born in 1561, died in 1626. Kepler was born in 71, died in 1630. Descartes was born in 1596. All three of these, first of all,
we have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
All three of these philosophers, scientists, or people are from the turn of the 16th century going into the 17th century. And then I ask, what was the reason for your exclusion of Al-Haytham and your mention of 3 scientists who all lived within 100 years of each other just after 1492? Oh, again. Now, note, there was no apology before. And there was no labeling of it as a mistake before. But when I asked about it, then it was noted as an apology and a mistake and an error. I apologize for that mistake. It was an error in my previous response. The mention of Bacon, Kepler, and Descartes and the exclusion of Al-Haytham in my earlier response was not intentional, and it was an oversight on my part. To answer your questions, the reason for my mention of the 3 scientists was to highlight the scientific revolution that took place in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. Or, we could highlight how the Enlightenment was driven by Islam in the Middle Ages. And so if you need to look for the scientific advances, that's where you would look. So, yes, it says, to answer your question, the reason for my mention of the 3 scientists was to highlight the scientific revolution that took place in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries, which saw significant advancement in the scientific method and paved the way for modern science. Al-Haytham, on the other hand, lived several centuries earlier and made important contributions to the development of scientific method. See, does it say the scientific method up here? I'm trying to delineate between it saying the scientific method and scientific method. There might be some discrepancy there. No, I don't see it. I don't see that. The impact of Islamic civilization on the development of science and mathematics, including Al-Haytham's work, cannot be overstated, and it's played a significant role in shaping the course of in Europe and in Europe. Did Europe even exist then? Place in Europe. Europe is just, I don't even know why it's Europe and the world. What methodology was used to confirm that Al-Haytham developed the scientific method? How is your methodology different from that which yielded your initial findings? And then it begins to talk about personal beliefs. It's not as first methodology. I was trained on the input I received from the user. My initial response was based on the commonly accepted historical narrative. Commonly accepted. This is usually, sometimes they use the term widely accepted. Commonly accepted historical narrative that the scientific method as we understand it today was formularized and popularized in the 17th century by scientists such as Francis Bacon. Regarding the methodology used to confirm that Al-Haytham developed the scientific method, historians and scholars have analyzed his works such as Book of Optics and compared them to the modern scientific method. So, the scientific method and a scientific method. This is what ChatGPT is saying. I start calling it chatbot. I'm going to probably start calling it ChatG pretext because it has constant pretexts for when it makes mistakes. So I may name it ChatG pretext. But ChatG pretext says that regarding the methodology used to confirm the Al-Haytham developed scientific method, historians and scholars have analyzed his works such as Book of Optics and compared them to the modern scientific method. They found that Al-Haytham's approach to scientific inquiry was similar to the modern scientific method and consisted of a repeating cycle of so on and so forth. So he's just saying there's a difference between the scientific method with they put the on it in the 1700s. So the only difference, if I'm not mistaken, was there a hypothesis or was there a lab? Did Hatham have a hypothesis? Let's see. It's neither here nor there, but hey, this is the post hour, so we can take our time. No, he hypothesized. So it's, what is it? Purpose, hypothesis, procedure. He designed them. Gather data. Purpose, hypothesis, procedure, data, conclusion. Yeah. Oh, analysis, conclusion. So was there an analysis? Yeah, he would then design the experience. So he required independent verification of his results. So that could be the analysis. I guess he had all the parts. And see, it cannot be overstated. That's a trap.
What is this nothing you talk about?
Cannot be overstated. Yes, it can. Try. Try to overstate it. Yeah, so I think that's the gist of that. I think I changed subjects after that. Oh, this is interesting. Last thing. We can just end on this. I asked, what type of sources has ChatGPT been less trained in? What sources are you currently training in? What specific overarching historical emphases are reflected in ChatGPT's biases? Also, what languages has ChatGPT been predominantly trained in? What languages have been trained to a lesser extent, relative proportionally to the number of speakers worldwide? I could have, and I may actually slow walk ChatGPT into answering that because it didn't really answer that. But I think if I can ask it in parts, it will go through the process of answering that. Lastly, I asked, give a bullet pointed explanation of the ways in which ChatGPT's training text sets were diverse. Because it says that ChatGPT trained on diverse sets of text. I think I missed that part. I was trained on a diverse set of text, which includes both primary and secondary sources. However, the training data may reflect some biases that were present in the sources used to train me, such as a historical emphasis on certain perspectives or individuals. My responses are based on patterns in that data I was trained on, or patterns in the data that I was trained on. And in the case of the information regarding Al-Haytham, the focus on the commonly accepted historical narrative may reflect a broader emphasis on that perspective in the training data. And you can say may, but that's what it is. I think that's probably the most honest thing ChatGPT said. ChatG pretext. The focus on the commonly accepted historical narrative may reflect a broader emphasis on the perspective in the training data. In terms of methodology, I do not have a specific process for confirming information, as I do not perform original research. There has to be some type of discernment and selective process, or else you would have included Haytham. So yeah, the information was included. I rely on information that was included in the training data and generate responses based on patterns in that data. To answer questions about specific information, I use a combination of deep learning algorithms and probabilistic models to generate responses. Yeah, I may actually ask it about the probabilistic models a little bit later. And then it goes into the languages. ChatGPT has been trained on a diverse set of text sources, but it's likely to receive less training on sources in less widely used languages. I would push back against this concept of less widely used, right? By actually looking at the numbers, because this could be something that ChatGPT was told. In terms of language, ChatGPT has been predominantly trained in English, but has also been trained in text in other languages, including but not limited to French, German, Spanish, and so on and so forth. Reading the text, regarding the text sources, they were diverse in the following ways. They came from a variety of genres, different types. Right? North America, Europe, Asia, Africa. Why in that order? Here's a question you asked ChatGPT. Why in that order? They reflect a variety of perspectives, so on. And so I actually gave ChatGPT the data of spoken languages, but it actually that's where it ends, because there was a discrepancy. There was a discrepancy in the question that I asked there. But yeah, so there we have it. You know, we've been time traveling through the tech world, back and forth via warp speed. In fact, we're going to engage the engage warp 9 now. In fact, no more engaging. I'd actually like to be beamed up. Can you guys get me out of here? I'll contact the ship, and see you tomorrow.